Ted, why are you looking at me like I have two heads or something?
No, just thinking about D&D monsters.
Oh, really? Which one?
Oh, the Chimera. That could explain the whole multiple heads thing.
Let's quit the corny jokes and talk about D&D lore and more. The Chimera. Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds. I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and as usual, I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy Ted.
Nerdarchy is a place where we like to discuss news, views, and homebrews for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and sometimes we even talk about other role-playing games.
So if you don't want to miss a single video, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and to tune to that notification bell.
Alright, we're going to talk about some D&D lore, some mythology, and the Chimera. So the Chimera is a mythological creature that originated in Greek and has been around for a very long time. And like many monsters, D&D has scooped them up, embraced them, maybe mixed them up, shook them up a little bit, and regurgitate them as something similar.
So yeah, something similar is very much what this happens to be. Obviously, if you're familiar with this, amazing monsters, it's definitely in my top 10 creatures. You've got lion, dragon, and goat all mixed together. And, in mythology, it wound up having the tail of a snake. There wasn't really a dragon attached to it, but it was definitely something very alien and very weird in Greek mythology.
Yeah, in Greek mythology, it was actually just a two-headed creature, except for the tail would be a third head because it was the serpent, it was the goat and the lion, and the goat actually breathed the fire. So there was that. Sometimes it was described as having a draconic hindquarters. It depends. The different mythologies changed it up a little bit. Also, oftentimes it was representative of a volcano. That kind of resurfaces in the lore. So there's a couple different versions out there.
Absolutely. And, those things that all piece together, I can see how the D&D mindset could take this and be like, well, as opposed to having a snake tail, it's breathing fire, it's slightly scaly. Well, let's just turn that into dragon, give the dragon the ability to breathe fire, have this make a lot of sense in that regards.
Now, in the earliest editions of Dungeons & Dragons, essentially, I think all the way up until 4th edition, really, it was always kind of either not talked about how the Chimera came about, or it was literally the crazy wizard did it. A lot of these weird amalgamation monsters were like that, where it's just a bunch of real world creatures kind of crammed together, or somebody on the D&D team, whether it was TSR or Wizards of the Coast, kind of found something and oh, this would make a cool monster. I think it was definitely more in the TSR days, where they're here's a bag of Japanese toys, and now I'm going to turn them into D&D monsters. Some of our most beloved monsters actually originate that way, and then a good portion of them were just lifted from mythology.
I have a couple of those old Japanese toys that I hold near and dear in my minis collection. But yes, the Chimera kind of came from that society where they didn't really feel, oh, let's come up with a cool story. We're just going to say the crazy wizard did it. Now it's more of attached to the Demogorgon, who is a multi-headed creature himself. So it kind of fits into that, puzzle.
Yeah, the idea was he came to the prime material plane, looked around and went, these animals are lame, and I know what we need to do. And he just crammed a bunch of them together. That was your original Chimera, and bam, they bred true from there. Based off of that, though, that the D&D lore as well as the original mythology over on D&D Beyond, actually a sponsor of this video, worth mentioning. There's a ton of stuff over there. Today, instead of giving you the whole big spiel we usually give about the sponsor, we're going to put in the description in the pin post a link to D&D Beyond, but a specific article because it's about chimeras. James Hayek did an awesome job where he takes that mythological creature and he kind of reinvents it as a D&D monster. So if you wanted to use the one from mythology, he also talks about the idea of using different kinds of chimeras. In the earlier versions of the game, there were different chimeras. In 3rd edition, they had the chimeric template where you could basically just make your own chimeras. They had the Gorgamera, which was a chimera, but it had a gorgon head instead of a goat head, and which is way more vicious. I mean, the thing had a petrifying breath, it had fire breath, and a iron, basically bullhead instead of the goat. Was much more vicious.
And if you actually look at the lore section of the Chimera, it will say, like, oh, this is the typical construction. So you really can jump in on that and make your Chimera be whatever it is you want to look and feel like. Yeah, I love the Chimera, and legitimately, if you don't change any of the stats that's there, you just visually change it, that kind of goes into what we call fast and dirty monsters, so that you can just be like, well, I'm going to just describe it different visually, but you use the same stat blocks. Only takes a couple seconds to, work up a new, description of what it looks like, and bam, you got a whole new monster that your players have no idea what it is.
Well, that's kind of absolutely what James Hayek says over on the D&D Beyond article is, use as the chassis, use your Chimera, use its stats, use all of its things, and kind of tweak it out from there depending on what variations you want to use. So this way you're like, oh, okay, well, this is already a CR6 monster. Now we can take it and we can tweak it, and that will kind of give you a baseline, and from there you might need to decide if you want to go up or down on your CR. But it's definitely a great way to play with it. So now let's kind of just get into what can we do with the Chimera as the monster from the Dungeon Master's point of view. But also we want to talk about what do you do as a player and you have to take on a Chimera maybe.
Well, first off, you want to look at some of that lore information that's in the monster manual and use that as your basis, as your guideline. It is a lion, a dragon, and a goat. It is stubborn, it is prideful, it's territorial, and it wants to accumulate treasure. So it says in there that should, adventurers or, someone that's, being attacked by this thing try to play up its vanity or persuade it with treasure or food, it might allow them to leave its territory. And its territory could range, up to an area of like 12 square miles, which, is pretty potent for such a creature. You can also play up the fact that as a lion, as a cat-based creature, it really likes to hunt. So if you want to kind of go with a more chase mechanic, you could really dive into that aspect where it's doing damage to the players. Maybe it's, just trying to chase them out of its territory, and they're just trying to survive, but it's toying with them. Know what your players' hit points are and do a little bit of damage each round as this thing just kind of, hurries and attacks them, and it could pull its punches to keep someone alive and running just for its pure sport.
They are cruel, evil creatures. And like you said, the lion likes to hunt. So they might want to toy with their prey. Definitely, as the DM, instead of just doing a straight up fight, why not have it come in, breathe its 15-foot cone, maybe it only hits one or two of the players, but it's enough for it to stay out of reach, and then it could swoop away. And it could just keep doing hit and runs. It could just wait for its breath weapon to recharge. Why not use its breath weapon? It has multi-attack. Use one of its other attacks instead of attacking with it against a smaller creature or what it would perceive as a weaker creature, because it's kind of cunning. It's not smart, but it is cunning enough to go, that's burly and strong, and that's a halfling, which is small and weak. It might make them make an athletics check instead and try to grab it, and as they're flying away, just drop it. So you can harry the party for a while, and you can make this encounter kind of last over the course of days. Maybe in its lair, there's a magical spring that it goes back to, and it drinks from it, which invigorates it and gives it some healing. Also, it has hit dice. That means it can heal during a short rest, just like the players can. It's a flying creature. Flying creatures are way harder to track than creatures that are on the ground. They don't leave a trail behind them. They just fly away.
Your best bet is, looking, if it flew low enough, did it drop anything? Did it disturb the ground or plants enough with a wing burst? That tracking is going to be nearly impossible, if at all possible. So you can have a lot of fun with it in that regards.
Although I will say, with guidance, advantage depending on if this is a favored enemy or favorite terrain for the ranger,
or if you have somebody that's just using the help action.
Yeah, there is ways to increase those rolls. So getting the impossible rolls in 5e is a lot easier than maybe the designers intended. So there's a possibility they could, but that doesn't necessarily make it that much easier to get to it. Like, oh, we found it. It's up in that sheer cliff and that bluff there, which is a climb. And who wants to make that climb with an angry chimera above you?
Yeah, flying monster while you're climbing, not being able to do, the easy stand and fight scenario.
Well, that's when the cat aspect comes back into play, right? You're climbing up a cliff. It's at the top. What do cats like to do? Knock things off. Whether it's you or it's knocking, boulders and rocks down from above. Freaking cats. So what can we do as a player when we have to encounter a chimera?
So obviously you want to find ways to take away its strengths and give its weaknesses. Things like slow or, things that are going to remove that flying capabilities are really like your best weapons here.
Yes, the slow won't remove it, but what it will do is keep it from really taking advantage of being able to use those hit and run tactics by limiting its actions. Earthbind is a 2nd level druid spell with a 300-foot range, and if they fail a strength saving throw, it's going to pull them to the ground, and they're not going to be able to fly. Their fly speed is reduced to 0 for the duration of the spell. It lasts a minute. That's essentially a combat. And, they fall at a rate of 60 feet around. It's not going to do any damage or anything. But in the meantime, if they are, high up and are being pulled to the ground, they can't reach you. And it does kind of give your spellcasters and your ranged combatants, however many rounds it takes for it to get to the ground to kind of start pinging at it before it gets there. So that low-level spell is going to be super effective against this foe.
So those are some awesome spells. As Dave says, while other than the breath weapon, this thing doesn't really have any ranged attacks. So whether you're earthbinding or not, ranged attacks are going to be super helpful. You've always got the ability to have a held action ready to attack or release a spell for when it comes into view or into range. Especially if it's using those hit and run tactics, that held action is going to be super helpful. If you have somebody who has a lower attack rate or attack bonus, and you have trouble hitting that armor class, you can use the help action to aid your ally to get a better chance to hit. And, all these small things add up to a bigger picture.
As both the player and the DM, don't be afraid to use creative tactics when encountering the chimera or any other monster for that part. Just because, like you said, the chimera doesn't have ranged attacks, which kind of made me think of this, there's no reason why the chimera couldn't, on its initial forays against the party and when it's toying with them, carry things with it in its mouth or its paws and drop them on the party like stones, logs, that sort of thing. It's fairly strong. It's a large creature, so it's got a decent carrying capacity. And, certain animals like crows are tool users and will do things like this. So it is not that far from the realm of possibility. And maybe this chimera is old. It's been around a while. It's learned some tricks because it's had some bad experiences that it was fortunate enough to survive. Like we said, if you did something cool, like back at its lair, there's a magical spring that it drinks from that restores it. That would be a cool thing that would also kind of speak to why it's been around so long. And it might make it, once the players finally defeat the chimera and track back to its lair, it'd be like a cool thing for them to find. And maybe it has some other properties that your players could take advantage of.
Next, you want to look at another low-level spell, Bless or Bane. Incredibly useful. Slow and Bane work really well together if you can, target them both on that same creature. And it really works just about on anything. So highly recommend that combo.
So with that, go over to D&D Beyond, check out that article, and get even more ideas on how to use a chimera in your game. And before we head out, I want to take a moment to invite you to join Nerdarchy, the adventuring party. Ted, what can they expect over there?
Over on Patreon, we're creating products for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons that players and DMs alike can drop right into their game.
But that's not all. We do monthly giveaways, and our patrons are automatically entered.
We do weekly hangouts with our patrons and more.
So quest on down to the description, join the Nerdarchy adventuring party, and until next time, stay nerdy.